Princess Oraline of the Sapphire Throne called the human weak before the whole war council, and the insult was meant to echo across 3 empires, because she said it beneath a ceiling of battle glass, with enemy fleets burning red on every wall, with generals demanding extermination, priests demanding vengeance, and nobles waiting to see whether the heir of Illyrian would rule like her mother or tremble like a child. The human stood alone at the foot of her dais. Plain gray coat, empty hands, no sword, no pistol, no armor. No honor scars brightened with gold, only a field satchel at his hip, and a calm expression that made him look less like a champion from Earth and more like a tired clerk. Billy had wandered into the end of history by mistake. Oraline looked down at him from her crystal throne and said, "This is what Earth sends when war knocks, a man too gentle to carry steel, a diplomat too soft to understand monsters, a healer who thinks words can stop missiles." Her court laughed because courts always laugh when fear wears royal permission. And the human did not defend himself. He only lifted his eyes to the maps behind her, watched the red enemy formations moving toward the border moon of Varises, and asked in a voice barely louder than falling dust, "How many civilians are still between the armies?" That was the first thing about him she hated. He did not look wounded when she called him weak. He looked worried for everyone else. His name was Captain Rowan Vale. Though Earth had stripped the title of its military shine and called him Special Envoy, Mediator, Humanitarian Observer, all the soft phrases Illyrian officers spat like spoiled wine. He had arrived after Aline sent a treaty beacon to Earth asking for intervention against the Karun Combine, a brutal coalition of iron clans that had crossed the eastern stars, seized 5 mining moons, and executed ambassadors in public squares. Earth had promised aid, but instead of fleets, it sent Rowan, one unarmed human with a satchel full of documents, vaccine ampules, ration tablets, old photographs, and more sealed authority than anyone in the palace understood. Oraline had expected the infamous Terran war engines, the ships that pirates whispered about, the Marines who fought in ruined corridors after oxygen fled, the orbital cannons that could crack asteroid fortresses. But Rowan arrived in a medical shuttle painted white, walked past her honor guard without admiring their blades, and spent his first hour asking about refugee roads, grain storage, prisoner lists, and whether the palace kitchens could boil water for 200,000 people if the reservoirs were hit. The council called him an embarrassment, but the truth was darker. Oraline needed embarrassment less than she needed victory. Her mother had died 8 days earlier when Karun raiders struck the northern funeral procession, leaving the empire without its old queen, without its best admirals, and without patience. The public wanted fire. The army wanted permission to glass the captured moons. The noble houses wanted contracts for rebuilding ruins they had not yet made. Even Oraline, young, exhausted, crowned too soon, wanted one clean answer. One enemy crushed so hard the universe remembered what happened when Illyrian bled. She looked at Rowan and saw refusal, not courage, not power, refusal. The infuriating refusal to become useful in the only language war seemed to respect. When General Virax slammed his fist on the strategy table and demanded authorization to strike Varises before the Karun fortified it, Rowan asked how many miners were still underground. When Admiral Selkira promised that collateral numbers would be acceptable, Rowan asked, acceptable to whom? When the archpriest declared that mercy had failed, Rowan asked whether mercy had ever been attempted before the cannons warmed by noon. The council hated him with a unity it had never achieved against the enemy. Oraline dismissed the council after 6 hours of argument, partly because she feared she might order Rowan thrown from the tower if he asked one more quiet question. He did not leave with the generals. He stayed beneath the battle glass, studying the enemy routes, the supply shadows, the hostage markings, the wounded sectors no one had color-coded because suffering was inconvenient to strategy. She descended from the throne in armor, silk, and morning silver, stopping so close that her crown nearly reflected in his eyes. "You understand that the Karun are not children to be reasoned with," she said. "They butchered my mother on a road of flowers." Rowan nodded. "I read the report. Then speak like a soldier." He looked at the red fleets moving on the wall. I have heard soldiers speak, Princess. The honest ones ask how to end war before war eats the people it claims to protect. She almost struck him then, not because he was wrong, but because grief hates being asked to think. Instead, she said, "You are weak, Captain Vale, and when Varesis burns, I will remember that Earth sent me weakness, wrapped in manners." Rowan lowered his eyes, not in submission, but in mourning. "I hope you remember something else first." That evening, the first Karun ultimatum arrived, carved into a live broadcast. Warlord Kazrith of the Iron Antler stood on the deck of a captured moon foundry with 3 Illyrian engineers kneeling behind him, chains at their throats. His armor was made from black plates and bone trophies. His face tattooed with victory tallies. His voice rough with ritual pride. "Princess Aureline, daughter of ashes, surrender the border systems, disarm your fleet, and marry your crown into the Combine. Or by Don Varesis becomes a funeral furnace." To prove his resolve, he ordered 1 engineer dragged forward. Aureline did not blink. The court did not breathe. Rowan stepped closer to the screen, watching the engineer's hands instead of Kazrith's blade. Then he said, "He will not kill her." Aureline snapped, "Do not comfort me with guesses." Rowan pointed at the trembling engineer. Her left thumb is stained with core coolant. She is needed for foundry stabilization. The threat is theater. His leverage is labor, not corpses. Kazrith raised the blade, smiled, then cut only the chain, shoving her back alive. Aureline heard murmurs ripple through the chamber. Rowan had seen the truth in a thumbprint, while admirals saw only rage. The weak man had just read a warlord more clearly than spies had read him in years. Rowan asked permission to answer the ultimatum. The council roared against it, but Aureline, still burning with humiliation, allowed it because she wanted him exposed before everyone. "Let the humans speak peace to wolves," she said, "and let every world see what wolves do with it." Rowan stood before the transmission altar. No armor, no guards, no royal seal except the temporary mark Earth had given him. When the channel reopened, Kazrith laughed at the sight of him. "Is Illyrian so barren of courage that it sends a nurse?" Rowan answered. "I am Rowan Vale of Earth. Authorized witness under the old contact accords. I am here to confirm prisoner welfare, civilian routes, and terms by which your forces may withdraw without further loss." The chamber erupted. Kazrith leaned toward the screen. "Amused, withdraw, human, I hold the moon. I hold the foundry. I hold the miners." Rowan nodded once. "You hold a reactor with failing coolant pumps, 14,000 workers who hate you, 3 clans whose supply rights were insulted when you seized command, and a princess whose grief you have mistaken for stupidity. You have, perhaps, 9 hours before your victory becomes a tomb. I suggest you let us help you leave it, asterisk." Asterisk Kazrith's smile thinned. Aureline stared at Rowan. He had not threatened, not pleaded, not flattered. He had offered escape, worse. He had offered it like a man offering shade to an enemy already standing in fire. Kazrith cut the transmission without answering. General Virax pointed at Rowan and shouted that Earth had disgraced the throne, that negotiating withdrawal with invaders would poison morale, that Karun understood only dominance. Rowan listened, then opened his satchel and placed 3 objects on the table. A coolant report stolen from intercepted maintenance chatter, a clan genealogy showing Kazrith's blood feud with his second-in-commander, and a ration chart proving the captured moon could not feed both occupiers and hostages beyond 3 days. "I am not negotiating with strength," Rowan said. "I am negotiating with hunger. Pride, fear, and machinery. Those are more reliable than speeches." Aureline wanted to reject the evidence because he had produced it too calmly. But the reports were real. The numbers were undeniable. And her generals looked at them with the anger of men whose simple war had become complicated. Still, Aureline ordered the fleet to prepare for strike. Not full glassing, not yet, but enough fire to remind Kazrith that Illyrian had teeth. Rowan did not beg, which infuriated her more than begging would have. He only asked for access to the refugee archives, prisoner family records, trade manifests, and the old acoustic broadcast towers beneath the palace. Useless things? said Admiral Selkra. Soft things, said the archpriest. Dangerous things, said the spy master. Because the spy master was clever enough to distrust a human who asked for harmless tools. Orlean granted access under guard, thinking paperwork would keep him away from command. For the next 12 hours, Rowan vanished into rooms no warrior respected. He read cargo logs until his eyes reddened, listened to miners' family messages, studied Karun funeral songs, mapped waterlines, spoke with captured smugglers, asked palace cooks how long yeast survived in emergency flour, and ordered embassy technicians to unpack crates marked relief blankets, children's radios, portable printers, and medical drones. The guards reported that he slept for 11 minutes in a chair and woke apologizing for wasting time. At dawn, Varesses did not burn because Rowan had made the moon too loud to burn cleanly. He used the ancient acoustic towers, devices built before quantum relays, forgotten because they were slow, ugly, and impossible to hack from orbit through them. Every worker tunnel on Varesses began broadcasting voices. Not commands, not propaganda, but messages from home. Mothers telling sons to breathe, husbands telling wives where spare keys were hidden, children singing old mining rhymes, priests naming the trapped alive instead of mourning them early. Alongside those voices came Karun clan songs. Real ones, not imperial mockeries, songs for safe passage. Songs for feuds delayed until winter. Songs sung when wounded warriors were allowed to leave battle without shame. Rowan had found them in trade archives and prisoner memories. Then he broadcast the proper withdrawal right across the entire moon, giving Kazrith's lower clans a cultural door through which retreat could become honor instead of cowardice. The effect was not visible from the palace at first. Then the enemy formation began to stutter, not militarily, socially. Clan units stopped obeying combined commands, officers argued. Some guards lowered weapons around miners because the songs made slaughter ritually unclean. Kazrith discovered that Rowan had not attacked his army. He had reminded it of rules older than conquest. Orlin watched from the command chamber with her hands clenched white around the throne arms. Half her generals called it trickery. Half called it genius. None called it weakness. Yet she still would not praise him, because praise felt too close to surrendering her anger. The Karun fleet remained dangerous. The foundry remained occupied, and Kazrith was not a fool. By the second afternoon, he adapted, jamming the towers with engine noise, arresting clan singers, and dragging hostages into shielded foundry levels where family voices could not reach. He sent a second broadcast, this one private to Orlean, showing the body of a young Illyrian officer, beaten but alive. "Princess," he growled, "call off your human spellmaker, or I begin removing fingers." Orlean turned to Rowan. Expecting flinching, he only asked, "May I speak to the officer, Kazrith?" Laughed and allowed it. Rowan stepped close to the screen and said, "Lieutenant Saren, your grandmother says the blue door still sticks." The officer blinked through blood, then coughed twice. Once short, once long, once short again. Rowan nodded. "Thank you." Kazrith frowned. "What was that?" Rowan answered truthfully. Proof of life. The broadcast ended, and Rowan turned to the war table. Foundry Level 7, West Pressure Vault. 162 hostages, 32 guards, broken lift access. No executions yet, Orlean stared. How, he said her grandmother's phrase was the authentication code. The cough pattern was location. The bruising told me he heard metal presses. The echo told me vault size. General Virax looked almost afraid. You trained hostages to speak in coughs. Rowan shook his head. Earth teaches civilians ways to survive being useful to monsters. There was no pride in the answer. And that lack of pride silenced the room more completely than arrogance could have. Orlean felt her insult return to her like a blade thrown badly. Weak, she had called him, because he had prepared people to live when heroes failed. Then the palace itself betrayed her. The assassination attempt came during the third night, not from Karun infiltrators, but from Illyrian loyalists who considered Rowan's restraint a disease. 3 young officers from General Virax's faction seized the northern command annex and tried to launch an unauthorized missile strike at Virax's. Their plan was simple: kill the hostages, blame the Karun, force total war, and make peace politically impossible. Oraline was in the archive vault with Rowan when the alarms began. She reached for her blade. Rowan reached for a wall terminal and killed the lights. She hissed. "Cowardice again," he answered. "Visibility helps shooters. Darkness helps people who know where the furniture is." Then he moved, still unarmed. Guiding her through a service corridor while palace gunfire cracked overhead, he did not attack the mutineers directly. Instead, he sealed fire doors, flooded corridors with kitchen steam, released archive dust into laser sensors, and used maintenance speakers to mimic guard movements in 3 wrong directions. Every choice delayed violence rather than escalating it, which made no sense to Oraline, till she realized he was herding the rebels away from missile controls and toward the old council pantry. Their palace cooks waited with flour sacks, boiling soap, and storage nets, because Rowan had warned them hours earlier that desperate patriots often chose midnight. The mutineers burst in, expecting officers, found grandmothers with ladles, slipped on oil, blinded themselves with flour, and fell beneath a storm of nets without a single shot fired. Oraline arrived moments later with elite guards, sword drawn for a battle that was already over. One rebel spat at Rowan from beneath the net. "You let invaders live, human. You are poison." Rowan knelt beside him, checked his pulse, and said, "You are 19. Your father died last week. And someone older used your grief like a match?" The rebel began to sob, not from mercy. From being seen too accurately to keep pretending he was righteous, General Virax demanded execution. Immediate and public, Oraline almost agreed, then saw Rowan looking not at the rebel but at her, waiting to see which kind of queen grief would make. That was when the princess began to understand blood was not always strength. Sometimes it was just impatience wearing armor. She ordered the rebels imprisoned alive, pending investigation. General Virax accused her of softness before the guard. Orlin stepped close and spoke with enough coldness to frost the air. "Softness would be allowing you to use children with dead fathers as tinder for your ambition. General, find me the officer who gave them launch codes, or surrender your command ring." The room changed around her. Rowan did not smile, but something in his shoulders eased, and Oraline hated how much that small relief mattered to her later. When they walked through corridors smelling of steam and flour, she said, "You knew this would happen," Rowan answered. "I suspected grief would look for a weapon," she said. "You suspect everything." "No," he replied. "I trust patterns." "Then what pattern do you see in me?" He was quiet long enough that she regretted asking. At last he said, "Someone taught you that mercy is a crack enemies enter through. But you keep choosing doors instead." Oraline looked away, because she had expected criticism, not recognition by the 4th day. The border crisis had become a storm of almosts. Almost invasion, almost massacre, almost civil war. Each faction waited for one corpse large enough to justify everything it already wanted. Kazrith wanted an Illyrian atrocity to unite the Karun clans. Virax wanted Karun cruelty to justify planetary fire. The noble houses wanted chaos to sell authority back to the crown. And Oraline, caught in the center, wanted revenge so badly it frightened her in private. Rowan asked for one more impossible thing: permission to enter Virax's unarmed, under a white signal, to inspect the foundry and speak directly with Kazrith. The council exploded. Admiral Selkaro called it suicide. Virax called it treason. The archpriest called it blasphemy against the dead queen. Oraline called it madness. Rowan accepted every name, then said, "If we keep speaking through screens, everyone can perform if I stand in the room." "Someone will make a mistake," she snapped. "And if the mistake is killing you," he looked at her with maddening calm, "then that will tell us who still wants war more than survival." She refused, of course. A princess could not send Earth's envoy to be murdered. Not because she cared, she told herself, but because alliances had consequences. Yet by midnight she found him in the shuttle bay, not sneaking, simply waiting beside the white medical craft, as if he had known she would come. He had packed no weapon, only his satchel, a recorder, several medical tubes, and a folded strip of blue cloth from Illyrian mourning rites. Orlin wore combat armor under a travel cloak. He looked at her. "You should not be here." She said, "I am the crown. Every inch of Varys's is mine, including its dangers," he said. "Then you understand this cannot become a rescue mission for Pride." She stepped closer. "Do not lecture me after making my disobedience sound predictable." For the first time, almost Rowan's mouth curved. Not a smile, a memory of one. "Yes, princess." They flew before dawn with 2 pilots, no escort. In every admiral in the palace, threatening to age 10 years before breakfast. Varys's looked peaceful from orbit in the way poisoned things sometimes look beautiful. Silver mines crossing black plains, foundry towers glowing blue. Worker domes clustered like beads beneath shield haze. Karun ships watched the medical shuttle descend, but did not fire. Because Rowan had broadcast patient transfer codes, clan withdrawal rights, and reactor failure warnings on open channels, forcing Khazrith to either receive him or admit fear before his own warriors. The landing pad was lined with ironclad soldiers. Huge, tusked, scarred, weapons raised, eyes full of insult. Orlene stepped down first. Because pride demanded it, Rowan stepped beside her. Because sanity demanded she not be alone, Khazrith awaited them in the foundry hall. Larger than his image, smelling of smoke and metal oil. He bowed mockingly to Orlene, then ignored Rowan. "Princess, you bring me the soft human? Have you decided to trade him for your moon?" Rowan said, "No. I brought you medicine for your engine crews." Khazrith blinked, and in that blink, Orlin saw the first hairline crack in his theater. The foundry air was wrong. Too hot, too bitter. Workers coughed in the shadows, Karun guards sweated beneath armor, and the floor vibrated with unstable rhythm. Rowan noticed everything. He asked to see the reactor wounds. Khazrith refused. Rowan handed him a thermal sheet anyway, listing rising failure points, coolant contamination, and an estimate of casualties if the core breached, including Karun soldiers, Illyrian workers, and mining families hidden below. Khazrith shoved the sheet away. "You think fear moves me?" "Human," Rowan answered. "No, responsibility does. Even if you bury it under trophies," some guards growled. Orlene put one hand near her blade. Rowan did not. He stepped past insult into risk. "Your clan codes say a commander who kills his own wounded for pride forfeits claim. Your second in commander knows this. Your priests know this. Your wounded know this. If this foundry melts because you refused help, your name is not terror. It is incompetence that landed harder than any threat. Because warlords could survive being hated, few survived being laughed at by their own dead." Khazrith grabbed Rowan by the coat and lifted him until his boots nearly left the floor. Orline's blade flashed halfway free. Rowan raised one hand without looking at her. Not stopping Khazrith, stopping her, the insult burned. But she obeyed. Khazrith snarled. "Draw a weapon, human. Give me a reason, Rowan." Hanging in the warlord's grip, said, "If I wanted you dead, I would have let your reactor finish the work." The hall went silent. Somewhere behind them, a wounded Karun engineer coughed blood into his mask. Rowan looked at him and said, "He has coolant lung. 10 hours untreated? Maybe 12? Khazrith looked despite himself. Rowan continued, "I can save him. Or you can make a speech while he drowns." The warlord's grip tightened. Then opened. Rowan landed badly, caught himself, and walked to the engineer without permission. No weapon drawn, no victory claimed, he knelt, opened his satchel, and began treatment, while enemies aimed rifles at his spine. Orlene watched him stop a room full of killers by making one dying man impossible to ignore. The engineer survived the first injection. Then another wounded guard came forward, then a worker child with radiation burns. Then a Karun priest with cracked breathing tubes who pretended not to need help until he collapsed. Within an hour, the foundry hall had changed shape. Not politically, not officially, but morally. Because wounded bodies do not respect banners when pain strips them equal, Rowan moved from one patient to another, directing Illyrian workers and Charon medics together, using clan words when needed, court dialect when useful, silence when grief required it. Orline found herself holding a bandage over the arm of a young Karun soldier whose eyes were too frightened to belong to an enemy. He whispered, "My brother is in the lower coolant pit. Please, princess, please." She almost said, "Your people killed my mother." But Rowan's lessons had become traps inside her mind, asking the question before rage could answer. How many civilians are still between the armies? She called for a map instead. Kazrith allowed the medical work, because refusing would shame him, but he did not yield. By evening, his second-in-commander, Vorga, arrived with clan elders, faces hard, asking why the Illyrian princess stood in the foundry unchained, why a human treated their wounded, why the reactor still limped toward failure. The old rivalries Rowan had identified sharpened in the air. Kazrith barked that all was under control. The floor shook at that exact moment. Lights flickering, sirens moaning. One of those accidents reality commits when liars speak too loudly. Workers screamed from the lower levels. Vorga demanded evacuation. Kazrith refused, claiming an Illyrian trick. Orlan saw the moment approaching, the old fork in the road. Pride or life, blood or humiliation. Rowan stood between the commanders and said, "Open the evacuation tunnels." Vorga said, "If we open them, Illyrian troops storm in." Rowan pointed at Oraline. "She gives her word they will not." Kazrith laughed. "A princess word." Rowan looked at her, waiting, not commanding. Not rescuing her from the weight, Oraline stepped forward. "I give my word. No assault through evacuation routes. Wounded first, children second, engine crews third, armed units last." Kazrith sneered. "Your mother gave words too." Before she died, the foundry hall froze. Oraline's grief rose like a blade from deep water. Her hand closed on her sword. And every Karun guard shifted. Rowan did not touch her, did not plead. He only said softly, "Princess, if you draw now, everyone who wanted this war wins." She could feel the entire moon waiting on her fingers, the dead queen, the hostage miners, the scared soldier, the rebel officers, the generals watching from far away, all of them pressing toward a single glittering answer. She let go, one finger at a time, and the sword slid back into its sheath. "My mother died because a coward attacked a funeral road," she said. "I will not honor cowardice by copying it. Open the tunnels." Vorga stared at her, then at Rohan, then at Kazreth. The second commander bowed once. Not submission, acknowledgement, and ordered the tunnels opened. That was the moment the war stopped being a battlefield and became a test no warlord could pass. The evacuation should have been impossible. 30,000 miners, 7,000 Karun troops, wounded in both colors, reactor alarms rising. Illyrian fleet commanders furious in orbit, combined ships demanding orders. And one princess standing in an enemy foundry, trying to keep her promise, while every tradition around her screamed betrayal. Rowan became the center of movement without appearing to command. He placed clan elders at tunnel mouths so Karun soldiers would not think they were surrendering. Placed Illyrian engineers beside reactor valves so workers trusted the repairs. Placed Orlan where both sides had to pass her and see that she did not flinch. Then sent open broadcasts of the evacuation to every ship in orbit, making secrecy impossible and massacre politically poisonous. When Admiral Selkra demanded permission to strike while Karun's shields were down, Orline answered on public channel, "Any Illyrian weapon fired at evacuation routes will be treated as treason against the crown." Selkra protested. Rowan said nothing, because this order had to be hers. Kazrith saw his war slipping away, not through defeat, but through usefulness. His soldiers carried Illyrian children. Illyrian miners guided Karun wounded through smoke. Clan priests accepted water from palace medics. And every shared survival made hatred less obedient. A warlord can command fear, but gratitude moves through cracks like roots through stone, late into the night. Kazrith tried to restore the old shape by seizing a group of hostages near Tunnel 9. He placed himself before cameras and roared that Oraline had tricked him, that the Combine must retake honor through blood. Rowan walked toward him alone. Hands empty, face gray with exhaustion, Oraline moved to follow. Vorga stopped her with one armored arm and said, "Let the humans speak." Kazrith raised his blade to a miner's throat. "I should kill one for every insult," he shouted. Rowan stopped just outside striking range. "You can," he said. And that honesty shocked everyone. "You can kill him. And then Vorga challenges you under your own law. Your wounded condemn you. Your fleet loses Varesses anyway. And history records that you won one throat because you could not hold one moon." Kazirith's eyes burned. "You think shame frightens me?" Rowan shook his head. "No, irrelevance does." The word struck like a railgun. Kazrith lunged. Not at the hostage, at Rowan. And Oraline saw the death blow coming. Rowan did not draw blood, did not even raise a blade. He stepped backward into spilled coolant foam, pulling his coat free from Kazrith's grabbing hand and letting the warlord overextend in front of his own cameras. Vorga moved then, not Rowan. The second commander catching Kazrith's wrist, clan elders shouting, "Old law!" Soldiers hesitating between loyalty and survival. Kazroth roared for obedience. But the wounded engineer Rowan had saved pulled off his breathing mask and spoke. "He saved me when you needed me dead for anger. My blade does not answer you." One by one, Karun soldiers lowered weapons, not surrendering to Illyrian, but refusing Kazrith. And that distinction mattered enough to stop a war. No blood had been drawn. Yet a warlord fell harder than if a sword had split him. Vorga formally relieved Kazrith under Combine battlefield law for endangering clan life. The arrest was ugly, loud, and nearly violent, but not fatal. Kazrith fought until his own armor codes locked under Elder authority. Then he was dragged away screaming that Rowan had bewitched cowards. Rowan only leaned against a cracked pillar, breathing shallowly, one hand pressed to ribs bruised by the earlier grip. Oraline wanted to ask whether he was hurt, but Queens had too many eyes on them. So she turned to Vorga and demanded terms. The second commander surprised everyone by offering immediate ceasefire, reactor stabilization, prisoner exchange, and withdrawal from Vares's under-monitored corridor. He did not apologize for the war. Not yet. Cultures built on iron rarely bent quickly. But he did something more useful than apology. He agreed to stop. Oraline accepted with conditions sharp enough to satisfy honor and humane enough to keep the evacuation moving. Rowan watched, silent now, because the work had passed from his hands to hers. By sunrise, both fleets had weapons powered, but unfired, facing each other across Varesses like beasts that had forgotten why they were snarling. The ceasefire depended on impossible trust, so Rowan replaced trust with verification. Joint beacon logs, public prisoner counts, mixed medical teams, neutral Terran drones, broadcasting live feeds, and old-fashioned paper manifests signed by commanders whose fingerprints could not be hacked. Admiral Selkra grumbled that paper belonged in museums. Rowan answered, "Museums preserve what civilizations keep forgetting." General Virax tried to undermine the ceasefire from orbit by leaking claims that Oraline had surrendered the moon. But the live feeds showed Illyrian miners walking out alive. Children reunited with parents, Karun units disarming around the reactor, and the princess herself standing between them without chains. Propaganda starved when reality was allowed to breathe, and by the second morning, the empire that had begged for vengeance began to ask a more dangerous question. If war could be stopped here, why had so many leaders rushed toward it everywhere else? The answer came with arrests. Virax's launch code conspiracy unraveled through the captured rebels. Noble houses who had profited from emergency contracts were exposed by Rowan's trade manifest analysis, and 3 priests who had forged morning prophecies to inflame retaliation were forced to read the original scriptures aloud. Where they discovered mercy had been present before they edited it out, Orlin did not let Rowan conduct the purges. He advised, witnessed, corrected numbers, and occasionally asked one quiet question that ruined a corrupt career. but the justice belonged to Illyrian. When she ordered General Virax stripped of command and tried for attempted mass murder, he shouted that her mother would have chosen fire. Orline stood before him in the great hall, tired beyond youth, and said, "My mother chose roads lined with flowers because she believed enemies could be met without fear. You turned her death into a weapon against everything she was." "I will not." Rowan stood behind the crowd, unseen by most, but Orlin felt his silence there like a handrail at the edge of a cliff. Only after the ceasefire held for 5 days did Orline find Rowan alone. He was in the palace garden at dawn. Sitting beside the memorial pool where her mother's reflection statue watched the sky, his satchel lay open, empty of medicines now, full of folded notes from families who wanted to thank or curse him depending on which grief had arrived first. He looked older than when he came, skin pale from sleeplessness, one cheek bruised, hands nicked and stained with reactor dust. Orline stood beside him without guards. "Do humans always win wars by exhausting themselves in public?" she asked. Rowan looked up. "Not always. Sometimes we lose that way." She sat on the stone rim, etiquette dying quietly between them. "I called you weak." He nodded. "You did. You did not correct me, no?" "Why?" He looked at the pool. "Because I was afraid you needed to say it more than I needed to deny it." The answer struck harder than accusation, because it made room for her grief without surrendering to it. Orline watched the water move around the statue's reflected crown. "I wanted blood," she admitted, Rowan said. "I know. I still want some of it that is honest." "Is honesty enough?" "No," he said. "But it is a safer beginning than pretending vengeance is justice." She looked at him then, truly looked. Not as a court embarrassment, not as Earth's strange answer, but as a man who had stood between armies and refused every invitation to become simple. "Tell me what you were before Earth made you an envoy." He was quiet long enough that birds began to sing in the silver trees. Then he said, "I was a battlefield surgeon on Calda Station during the Three Banner War. We ran out of anesthetic before we ran out of children. After that, I learned languages, law, logistics, hostage signaling, religious rites, machine failure patterns. Anything that could keep me from needing a knife where a door might work," Orline whispered, "and when no door works." Rowan looked at his empty hands. "Then someone draws blood, and I spend the rest of my life asking whether I missed a door." She understood then that his weakness was not inability, it was discipline, a refusal strengthened by knowledge of exactly what violence could do. Men like Virax loved war because they imagined it as thunder they commanded from a clean room. Rowan hated it because he had held its smallest pieces while they cried for mothers. That hatred had not made him soft. It had made him precise. He feared blood enough to respect every path around it. And that respect had saved Vares's, saved her crown. Perhaps saved the Karun clans from a fire they would have mistaken for glory until their children choked on it. She said, "I thought strength meant proving enemies should fear me." Rowan replied, "Sometimes strength is making enemies survive long enough to stop being enemies." She laughed once, quietly, bitterly. "That sounds impossible," he answered. "Most useful work does." The peace talks began 3 days later. Ugly, sleepless, and honest. Reparations, prisoners. Borders, widows, reactor access, all written down where propaganda could not hide it. Rowan demanded one thing above all, an archive with every name kept visible. The treaty was signed at dusk, not with cheers, but with a silence so deep it felt like a wound closing carefully. Orline pressed her seal into blue wax. Vorga pressed his iron mark beside it. Rowan signed only as witness, smaller than both rulers, almost invisible beneath their crests. Yet every camera in 3 empires centered him for a moment. The weak human who had arrived without a weapon and made war itself look wasteful. Reporters demanded a speech. He refused, of course. So Orline stepped forward instead. Her crown caught the green moonlight. Her voice carried across the relay nets to Illyrian streets. Karun camps, mining tunnels, hospital wards, and palace halls where generals still muttered into their cups. "I called Captain Rowan Vale weak," she said, and every courtier who had laughed felt the memory turn sharp. "I was wrong. I mistook restraint for fear because fear had taught me to worship force. I mistook mercy for surrender because grief had made me hungry for proof. Today I have seen a man stand between revenge and survival, and choose survival until revenge had no throne left. She paused, because the next words mattered more than royal pride. Strength is not the speed with which we draw blood. Strength is the discipline to ask who will bleed after we feel satisfied. Strength is the courage to let enemies live when their lives can become evidence. Repair, warning, and witness. Strength is refusing to hand our dead a future made only of more dead. Then she turned to Rowan before the whole watching sky. Captain Vale, Earth sent me no army. No cannon, no executioner. Earth sent me a man I called weak. And because he was strong enough not to become what I demanded, my people still breathe. Rowan looked deeply uncomfortable, which made half the hall smile despite itself. Vorga muttered that humans made even praise look like punishment. And for the first time since her mother died, Oraline laughed without bitterness. Peace did not become easy after the signatures. No honest story should claim that there were riots in outer districts. Karun hardliners attacked supply convoys. Illyrian widows spat at reconciliation officers. General Virax's trial exposed more rot than the crown wanted to admit. And Oraline spent months doing work no ballad would sing, reading casualty budgets, visiting hospitals, attending tribunals, reopening mines under joint inspection, and answering letters from citizens who called her savior, traitor, daughter, coward, queen. Sometimes all in the same paragraph. Rowan stayed as Earth's witness. Though his official mission had ended, he refused court chambers and slept near the medical wing until Oraline ordered him into a proper guest suite under threat of assigning him 3 poets as roommates. He continued asking unbearable questions. How many guards are tired? Which village has not received clean filters? Who profits if this bridge stays broken? Why are the widows waiting outside while ministers debate carpet color? He remained in every possible way inconvenient, and slowly, impossibly, the Empire began to heal around inconvenience. The first year after Varessa's No Border Moons burned, the second year, Illyrian and Karun engineers built a shared coolant station. D named it Central Pump after the young officer who had coughed a hostage code through broken teeth. The third year, the Festival of Returning Stars included lanterns made from mining foil donated by both sides. Children who had been hostages marched beside children whose fathers had worn Karun iron, watched by adults who still flinched at old uniforms but did not reach for weapons. Oraline became known not as the queen who avenged her mother, but as the queen who refused to let her mother's murder write the Empire's next century. Some called that weakness, usually men far from hungry children. But the word had lost its old power over her whenever a senator used it. She asked for numbers, names, consequences. And the room usually discovered that anger had arrived without a plan, and in the quiet margin beneath that annotation, where only archivists and stubborn students would ever look, she added the truth no official treaty could carry. I called him weak on the day he arrived, then watched him hold back an empire, a warlord, a fleet, my grief, and his own anger. Without drawing blood, if that is weakness, may every throne in the stars be guarded by such fragile men.